Hello and welcome to this week's TES podcast. I'm Dave Speck and joining me is Will Stewart. Hi, Will.
Hello.
We've got Mary Louise Clues. Mary Louise, hello.
Hi there.
And John Roberts. John, hi.
Hello there.
Now, TES analysis this week reveals that 1 in 5 schools have now been infected with COVID so far this term. John, this is your story. It's some areas are worse than others, aren't they?
Yes, so that's probably one of the big things that's come out of this. So we asked all of the local education authorities how many COVID cases they'd had in schools and what that had meant in terms of closure. And one of the overall, we got 40 responses back, and the overall figure is one in 5 schools so far in the September term have had at least one positive COVID case of a member of staff or a pupil. But yeah, I think the thing it points to is the kind of the imbalance as well. So there was 6 areas, including 5 in the north, where the majority of schools, or 50% of schools or more, had a COVID case. And in one place, in Oldham, which is obviously one of the places that's been highlighted as having a high transmission rate, a few weeks ago, they had 78% of schools and all of the secondary schools, and a few other areas in the north, in Yorkshire and the northeast as well. And most often in these cases, it's resulted in a bubble closure or a partial bubble closure. So it's not just that it's happening, but it's obviously it's just shed a new light, I think, on the scale of disruption as well.
What sort of you did it with Amy? Is that right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So myself and Amy Gibbons, she did most of the number crunching.
Sorry.
No, go on. Well, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, what sort of spread? Your responses were they kind of from across the country, or?
Yeah, across the country, and also a mix of rates. You know, and obviously it's like a fast-moving picture. So quite a few authorities said that they didn't have the data. You know, as whenever when we do these kind of big collection exercises, things come back in different formats and whatnot. But there was both a geographic spread and a spread in terms of the numbers. So some were seeing very small percentages, less than 10%, all the way up to 78. What was striking, though, I think, was that the majority of the ones with the bigger numbers were all in the north of England that have come back. But it's 40 councils, so just under a third of the LEAs in England. But it's interesting that 1 in 5 already have had a COVID case, and we're only 1 month into term. We spoke to the NEU, and they sort of said that this, you know, if we look what's happening with the coronavirus nationally, the chances are this kind of disruption is only going to get worse. And I think as well, it ties into other issues. So we've seen this concerns about lack of testing. That's one thing, and also lack of public health advice. You've seen that, you know, what?
Well,
20%.
I was going to say, John, it seems to be a bit of a luxury if a school can actually find out if it's got a COVID case, because our survey has also shown that you know, lack of testing is becoming more and more of a problem in schools. Is that right, Mary Louise? I mean, that's something you've.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've TES latest survey of around 10,000 teachers. Head teachers actually came back to us and said that in 20% of schools they've been struggling to keep them open because of the lack of testing and the impacts that's having on staff. Some head teachers are saying that they're having to cover lunchtime duty, to cover lessons. They haven't got the budgets to bring in supply teachers. So this is a real issue. And in a quarter of schools, they've said that they've had to send at least one bubble home as a result of being concerned about not being able to get a test, and you know, the issue that it might come back as positive, and so they've had to send that class or year group bubble home. So it's having a massive impact.
I think this sort of ties in with a story Claudia did, doesn't it, about this rapid testing system in Italy. Apparently the schools are about to deploy this test where you can find out if you've got COVID within 15 minutes, which would kind of eradicate this problem overnight, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been calls, particularly from MPs in Rhondda Valley and places like that, that are being really affected by local lockdowns, and saying why can't we get the system up and running in schools in the UK? It's an antigen, I understand, it's an antigen based test, which very rapidly shows whether you have COVID, or also can identify flu as well. So it kind of can distinguish between, you know, people having very similar COVID symptoms, and it might be flu. And Italian Health Ministry announced this week that they were rolling it out. They've already got it at airports and ports, and they're rolling it out to schools nationwide as well. So yeah, a growing chorus of people calling for a similar system to be rolled out here to help schools and relieve the pressure.
Hang on, Mary Louise. I think we've just got a new face for the TES podcast this week. No, yeah, okay. Let me just move on, because this our survey, and now it's been responded to by about 10,000 school staff around Britain. But there's also a lot of people have expressed dread about the prospect of having to deliver remote learning if there's another lockdown. That's quite an interesting line, isn't it? Important stuff, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So well, obviously, with the growing incidence of positive COVID cases and lack of access to testing, it means that schools are having to close, or bubble group year groups are having to go home. And obviously, as we learned this week, you know, schools are now under a legal duty to provide remote teaching. There's been a bit of a kind of shock reaction to that, but quite apart from that, teachers are just saying they're absolutely filled with dread around the prospect of having to do remote teaching. They just don't feel that they either can kind of deliver the kind of quality of teaching that they really want to deliver, or they don't have access to the technology and the equipment that they need to do it. So
yeah.
So
there was that teacher sort of saying that she has 2 laptops, she's 2 children. So if they're at home, they're going to be using the laptops, and they have priority.
Absolutely, and also sort of if everyone's at home, they just haven't got the Wi-Fi. You know, their Wi-Fi's falling over in terms of the capacity for the internet to do it. And another teacher was just saying that they just can't look at quite often can't see all the children that they're teaching, if they're doing like if they're doing a live lesson, or if they're doing, if they're just putting work on an app and children do it, they can't sort of just sort of look at them and talk to them and face to face and get the sense of whether they're getting it and whether they're making progress with these children as well. There's just, teachers just want to do their best, and kind of often at the moment with kind of technology as it is, and kind of the resources that they have, they feel it's much more difficult doing it remotely.
John, can I just come to you? It's another story we ought to mention, that, as if schools and teachers haven't got enough to contend with. Ofsted has now admitted that its autumn term visits are in fact inspections. Is that right?
Yes, it's quite an interesting story, this one. So as we've spoke about quite a bit, we've had this whole kind of controversy about Ofsted's new visits. They're going in to schools to check how they're supporting pupils to catch up, and they've been at pains to tell schools that these visits are not inspections, they're not graded, it's not something they need to prepare for, they're here to help, it's constructive, all this sort of stuff. The NAHT union, we revealed yesterday, have basically kind of taken issue with this and said, well, if these aren't inspections, schools can say no. If you're not coming in with your statutory powers as an inspectorate, then is this optional? And they basically said that they were starting the judicial review process, and as part of the response they got, Ofsted have basically confirmed that these are, the language they use is really, really interesting. They said fall within the broad concept of inspections. And so the NHT wrote to their members this week, basically saying this is confirmation that they're inspections and you should treat them as such, which is the exact opposite of what Ofsted has been telling the sector. It's kind of a learning exercise. the stumbling block already had been that Ofsted is planning to publish a letter about each school it visits, and that was already causing disquiet amongst the teaching unions, particularly the leadership ones. But now there's the kind of confirmation that in terms of the legal status of this activity, it is Ofsted going into schools as the inspectorate inspecting. So how much of a difference this makes to people's actual lived experience of them remains to be seen. But it's quite striking, I think, that the whole message has been these are not inspections, and now there's kind of brackets, well actually they are. Seems to be kind of the message that's come out today, this week.
They're trying to vote both ways, really, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's again, I've mentioned this before when we talked about these visits. I think Ofsted's having some difficulty kind of redefining itself. It's got what schools kind of want of it now, and I think it's trying to kind of balance those two things. Ofsted actually responded quite strongly to the NHT and said that they risked causing anxiety amongst their membership needlessly, and urged people to look at the positive feedback that there's been so far online. But yeah, it'll be interesting to watch it play out further. But it's certainly a very interesting story to write, definitely.
Do you think schools were going to turn around and say you can't come in because these aren't inspections?
I wonder whether that's what had prompted the NHT's question. And I think the other thing is there's the whole thing about the fluid picture we're talking about around COVID, and schools can ask for to defer a visit. I nearly called it an inspection, and I don't know whether we should or not. Schools can ask to defer, and COVID is one of the reasons that they can ask for that to happen. But I think the NHT were at pains to try and say, well, let's be right about this. You're trying to sort of portray this as constructive and mutual, but in fact it's a statutory thing, and we've got an obligation to let you in. Therefore, that's inspection. So I think it adds more weight to those who think that it is a form of inspection, because effectively they've had confirmation that, and I suppose to put the other side across, Ofsted will say, look, it's completely different to routine inspection. We won't be using the framework, we won't be inspecting, we won't be producing a grade.
Well, look, just to move on, what do you all think to our rebel school story this morning? We understand from the DFE that there are a handful of schools, we're calling them rebel schools, that are not following the DFE guidance, and that they're employing rotas. They're admitting pupils on a rota basis. It's a very, very small number according to the DFE, and the DFE is working with these schools. But we managed to speak to a head teacher on Zoom about something else. We were speaking to him about something else, but it turns out he had something more to say to us. And he's using this. He's using a system where he has like half his pupils in the morning and the other half in the afternoon. And he says it's working really well. It's not what the DFE is advising, but this head teacher says he's it's making the schools safer, it's calmer, the quality of teaching has improved. The quality of teaching is better, and he says he's not having all the parents sort of crowding around the school gates all at once. So that's cut in half as well. Will, I
think it raises a question of exactly what rotas are, because if you look at the guidance for so the DFE does say that schools can use rotas, don't they? Once you get to a tier 2 COVID situation, and then they say rotas should be. They talk in terms of pupils being in 1 week on, 1 week off, which would kind of makes sense perhaps in terms of reducing infection, and they say you shouldn't do it daily. So personally, when I think it's a great story, it's fascinating, especially the fact that DFE actually, there are these schools that aren't doing what the DFE wanted. When I first saw it, I thought, well, that's not what you'd expect as a rota, kind of a staggered start, but the DFE are clear that is an issue. And you thought it was. I think the other thing is why a rota is a problem, and one of the reasons has been that you don't want pupils missing out on education for long periods. But Dave, as you pointed out when we were discussing this earlier, it's to do with, you think it's to do with even the version that's operated at the school you spoke to, that could cause some disruption in terms of childcare, you thought?
I mean, the DfE did come out in May, and it gave a number of reasons why it's against the use of rotas that under areas which haven't got high transmission rates. One of them was that it's harder for parents who are harder for working parents. It creates more cleaning at the school, and it limits the staff options because they've got to stick with a particular rota, so you can't sort of move the staff around. That's what they said in May. The guidance is still crystal clear. Right at the top, the back to school guidance says schools should not use rotas. It just throws that question of, like, one of the problems is lack of space. Like, being able to social distance is desirable, but having so X many numbers of pupils in a school means it's not achievable. And so you can see why a school might just say, well, let's just, however the rota operates, let's cut it in half. And yeah. I think, whilst people say, well, that's too much of a disruption to normality, I think the next couple of months, I think, is going to be about how much normality can we get away with, and when does trying to keep things normal become a problem. That was a really, really interesting piece. Well, and this head, he uses the phrase of being creative with the guidance, and we've got a clip of him. It's a 2-minute clip of the head explaining in his own words what he's done, why he's done it, and and you can see that's exactly what he's saying. It's making it easier to follow easy to make his school safer. But look, I'm conscious of time, which as ever is our master. Mary Louise, I know you might have something that will be of interest to us as a happier note to end on.
Well, actually, I was just wondering about this need for social distancing as we get into winter, and kind of the National Head Teachers Union calling for Nightingale classrooms. And we were talking just before we started today about all the empty offices. Surely there's an answer there. What do we think? Classrooms in central London offices. But that wasn't what I was going to talk about. What I was going to mention was actually we ran a story earlier this week about a survey of school children, which has shown that teaching is now is the third most attractive career option for children, which is level pegging with social media influencers, which I thought was really interesting, because I always hear children talking about how they want to be. I think for boys there's these Minecraft social media influences, and how they're kind of completely enthralled with them, and for teachers to kind of level peg with that, and children to see that as attractive. I think it's encouraging.
Yeah, shows how important they are, doesn't it? In their life, they're the ultimate influencers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Who was Jay? Who was top then?
Professional footballers,
right?
Followed by doctors, and then teachers, social media influence, level pegging. Yeah. So.
Well, that's not a bad note.
I wonder whether.
John, have you got a final thought?
Yeah, all I was going to say was I wondered to what extent homeschoolers help boost teachers up the ratings. I know my kids love their teachers a lot more than they did after 3 months of Robert's homeschool. So, yeah.
Well, look, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and join us next week. Bye.